Hi everyone, I'm the plant propagator and welcome to my channel. It is a beautiful day in Southwest Florida. It is mid-November, 81 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is 26 degrees Celsius. Just a great day, low humidity, no cloud, there's a few clouds over there, very few clouds in the sky, just a beautiful day. What I want to do today is share with you a couple of my new blooms on some relatively recently acquired orchids, I guess within the past year. And then I want to talk about roots, because with orchids, it's all about roots. And one of my last videos, I did some repotting of some Cattleyas, and I want to show you what the roots look like in these Cattleyas and some of the older Cattleyas that I have. And I want to share with you what kind of root growth there is and what to be looking for and how important root growth is in orchids. And it's essentially how you gauge their happiness. I mean, you can look at flowers there and here, and that's an indicator, sure. But until you get those flowers, and the flowers they don't bloom constantly, you really have to gauge the growth of the orchids by looking at the roots, and it's a real good indicator. Anyway, I'll get to that in just a little bit. What I want to share with you, though, is a couple of my orchids where these are relatively new blooms on these plants. This is an Oncidium. I think it's Sweet 16. Prepossessing, I think, is the name. Yeah, but I'm not. I think that's how you say it. And this looks and smells a lot like Oncidium Sherry Baby. The blooms are a little bit, sorry, getting too close. The blooms are a little bit bigger. They're not quite the same markings on this plant. And again, this plant I got about a little less than a year ago, and it's been growing, doing well. The bloom spike came out on it a while ago, and it just has taken a long time to open. And it's not even completely open yet. You can see the blooms on the top of the spike aren't quite there yet. The fragrance, it's like Sherry Baby. It is chocolate. And I like my Sherry Baby, which is also blooming right now. The bloom spike isn't as big, and the flowers aren't as big. But it's a nice plant. And I've talked to people that have said there's no comparable Oncidium to Sherry Baby as far as the sweet chocolate fragrance goes. This is pretty close. This is a lot smaller plant. I haven't had this for as long a time, but it's doing pretty well, and I do like it, and it's my first bloom on this plant, so I just wanted to share it with you. All right, so that's Oncidium Sweet 16 Prepossessing. All right, the second orchid that I want to share with you is a Cattleya, and I've had this for a little less than a year. And this is nice because I've got a couple of different bloom spikes coming out. There's two blooms on this. These opened yesterday, right here, and I really like them. And then these there are three blooms on the other spike, and these have been open for a few days. And the name of this one, this actually, when I bought it, I picked it up at RF Orchid, and when I first bought it, there was it was only the cross was on, and it's still only the cross is on the tag, but now it's been named, and this is River Kwai Pink. And so this is a really nice, vigorous, fragrant Cattleya with a pretty, you can see it's got pretty big blooms, and they're pretty colorful. So I'm overall pretty happy with this. Again, I've had it in my collection for about a year, a little less than a year, and it's done pretty well. I've got a lot of other orchids that I've had for a lot longer, and they haven't done this. So, you know, this is an indicator. If I have orchids that do well, I'm gonna use this. And look how just incredibly vigorous the plant is. Again, only after having it for just a year, it's put out a few new leaves, and the leaves have had these bloom spike with really big, beautiful blooms. I'm not sure I like the colors that much of this, but it's, you know, it's a nice big frilly. It's kind of what I like, but maybe I'd like it a little bit more if there was a little bit more contrast and colors in there. But still a nice plant that I think I'm going to start including in my breeding program. Just again, because these vigorous, highly floriferous plants are just great to have, and it's what people like, and it's what I like. And again, the fragrance on it, it doesn't smell like any of the other Cattleyas that I have. So the fragrance on it is fairly unique, and it's just nice. I have this actually sitting on a table in my lanai, and when I sit there, just when I'm sitting there working, you can smell it throughout the day. A lot of Cattleyas and orchids overall, they'll only be fragrant at certain times of the day. This is fragrant now. It's fragrant the whole day. It really is a nice plant. So maybe I could cross it with something that has some yellows or some oranges in it, and see what I get. And I'll get kind of a jumble. Okay, of different colors and things like that. All right, so let's move on a little bit. What I want to talk about is orchids, orchid roots. And you can tell a lot from the roots in orchids. And like I said, it's just all about the roots. The roots indicate how vigorous, how well the orchid is doing, how vigorous it is. I have some vandas mounted on the trees next to me, and I've always had a hard time growing vandas. They just didn't seem to do that well for me. Now I can get them to grow really, really nicely. I strapped them to my palm trees, and the roots grabbed on, and the roots are just growing incredibly well. So, and the root on the plant that's to my immediate left here, the root system is growing really well, and you look behind the plant, and there's just a monster new root that came out of the back of this plant. So it's doing really well. The problem with this, well, with all my vandas, some of them are young, some of them are seedlings, and the roots are growing really well. They haven't bloomed yet, which I'm waiting for. They get really good light. They get irrigated 3 days a week, fertilized 1 day a week, and they get rained on, depending on the time of the year, on alternate days. One of the other vandas that I have another vanda, and I'm sorry, I got to look the name here. Oh, I know the name. It's Rhacostylus gigantea, and it was a gift from a friend. So thank you very much, Diane and John. And this plant is also putting out, the roots have grabbed on, and it's putting out another huge roots. And I have another plant like this that it's a seedling that's really small, and the roots on it are growing. The plant itself is growing, but these have huge roots. And it's doing well. All of my vandas that are mounted on my trees are doing well, but I haven't had a chance, they haven't bloomed yet. But I'm happy because the roots are growing so well, and again, that's an indicator. The roots on vandas and on orchids in general, they are, depending on the type of orchid that it is, There's terrestrial, and then there's epiphytic, and the epiphytics, of course, grow around the trees like these vandas do and onto the bark, and they attach themselves. When you have plants in potting mix, they grow down into the potting mix, but they still like to be aerated. They like to dry out between waterings, and most of the orchids that I lost early on in my orchid growing career, I lost due to root rot because they were in bark or they were in another densely packed medium, and it wasn't airy enough. And so now what I use mostly is, again, the lava stone and leca, and I do use bark, and I use some other medium components occasionally. But I like to have my potting mix very light, and I like to have the roots dry out. When you water these plants in the pot, the water just goes right through, and that's great. What people are used to growing, people that are growing regular plants, you soak it, the soil's wet, and that's what they do. And again, that's what I was brought up on. That's what I used to do. And orchids are not like that. They like to have the roots dry out. When you water these orchids that have the roots, these epiphytic orchids that have the roots exposed, in many cases the roots will turn green. And orchid roots are photosynthetic, but they don't derive too much of their energy from the photosynthesis that occurs in the root. It may be more for localized root growth, but when you water them, an area in the root of the velamen that's covered, that's essentially the outside layer of tissue in the root, hydrates, and then it becomes translucent, and you can see the chlorophyll and the chloroplasts that are in the inner portions of the roots. And that's an indicator of what's, again, going on. If the roots are green, that means the roots are, after you water them, that means the roots are alive and everything is good. So, when you water the plants, you'll see them turn green, but again, you want to look for the vigorous roots. The root tips of the rapidly growing orchid plants, the root tips will be green because those cells that are on the outside, the velamen cells haven't developed yet, and they're actually dead cells. They're empty cells that still have structural integrity. So they take up water and they can take up nutrients, and those are transported, but the root tips are green because that tissue hasn't died yet. The velamen tissue on the outside of the roots hasn't died yet. But it's growing, it's all part of the process, it's good, and that's part of the function of this tissue in roots. Back to looking at the orchid roots, I want to show you some plants, and we'll start off with the plants that I just put in new potting mix. I just transplanted these about a week ago, and not much is going on here. So these roots are in the potting mix. They're growing down. There's a little bit of growth maybe going on top, but this is good. What you want to see is the roots that are on the top, that are just kind of working their way around the potting mix. So this is one that I actually this isn't one that I repotted recently. This is one that I repotted maybe a couple of months ago. And this is LSA Dick Pippin Lemon Yum Yum from Florida Suncoast Orchids. And this, I wanted to show you this because there actually has been a huge amount of root growth that you can see on top of the mediums. I'm sorry, I misspoke before. But the roots are growing on top of the medium. It's doing really well. I selected this plant when I looked at the plants that Jim was selling, and this is from an orchid show. When I was looking at the plants he was selling, I picked the one that had the most roots that were growing out from the new leaf, and all of the roots continue to grow, and they went down to the medium, and they're kind of wrapping around. I don't know if you can see it. They're wrapping around the leca that's in the base of this pot here, and they're growing down in there, and they're just doing happy. They're just doing well, and this plant is happy. This is a real vigorous plant. And again, when you go and you're shopping for orchids and you pick the plants, get the ones that have the nice looking young roots, and that usually is an indicator that this is a nice, nice plant. The other one that I want to show you, I also picked up at the same orchid show, and this is a Cattleya intermedia, and when I picked this up, this didn't have any roots on it. The roots were all, this was an importer at this meeting, and the roots were all dried up and not much left to it. So the plant still looked okay, but it had this new leaf coming out. And then what has happened since then is, with that leaf coming out, is it's put out a few roots, and it's got some young roots growing out of it also. And again, it's just doing well. The roots love this medium. They're growing down into the medium. It's not too wet. This is a real aerated medium, and this plant is it's going to do really well. So that's just what you have to look for. I do want to show you a couple other plants. This is a little bit older plant. This is Dick Smith. And this is, again, a good indicator of what you should look for and what's going on. I hope you can see the roots that are growing out of the base of that pseudobulb right there, right in the middle of the screen. And these roots in this plant is doing well. I just repotted this, I think maybe about 3 weeks ago, not very long ago. It was in a small pot. It needed to be repotted. And the new leaf was growing out, and there you could see the roots were just starting to come out of it, but they have really tremendously elongated, and the roots have grown down into the potting mix. So the best time to, again, replant, and when is when the roots are just starting to come out. So this plant is doing pretty well. I want to show you in general this is a mature plant. And this is a mounted plant, and I don't have too many that look like this. And this is one actually that I didn't grow, but I bought from somebody who was selling his collection. And this plant is just, again, doing quite well. And so this is Greenvale Dressy, and I'm excited because I've got a capsule right here forming. I used it in a cross. It's pretty close to being ready to harvest, but what you can hopefully see at the base of this plant is a couple of new bulbs growing out, leaves growing out of the base, just out of the bottom. Yeah, you should be able to see that. It's hard for me to see here. But this is also doing well. The roots it's just coating this piece of wood. It's probably cedar. There's no degradation of the wood at all. But this is what this plant likes. This is watered. It does well, but the roots are just out there exposed. This is how these plants grow in the wild. Actually, this is even a little tougher than the wild, because usually in the wild it'll be in bark on the side of a tree, and this is just regular. Let me show you the back of this. This is just wood. It's just a piece of wood, and a lot of orchids grow like this. I have a lot of my encyclias that I've mounted just on cedar boards like this, and this plant is doing pretty well. It will hopefully continue to do well. Greenvale, that plant, I love the flowers on it. They're small, but I love the fragrance of that Cattleya there, and so I crossed it. This capsule right here, I crossed it with a big floofy Cattleya that's really fragrant. So we'll see if I can get bigger flowers in a vigorous plant. Again, multiple blooms per spike. I like this plant. I like what I crossed it with, and we'll see what happens. So that's all I have for today. I just wanted to share with you some of my new blooms and share with you some little information about orchid roots and how they're really a good indicator of growth and happiness of your orchid. Again, it's all about the roots. So that's all I have for today. If you like the video and you want to continue to see them, it would help me out if you could click on like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already a subscriber. Okay, that's it. Happy propagating.